Dark magic is not always about darkness, and not everyone who knows it is an enemy. He knew things she was never taught, and she was ready to listen. The dungeons of Hogwarts were colder than she remembered. Even years after the war, the air still carried a chill that no warming charm could truly dispel, as though the stones themselves remembered pain. Hermione Granger paused at the threshold of the abandoned classroom, her wand light glinting off dust-covered desks and a single figure standing at the far end. Draco Malfoy. He hadn't changed, not in the way people said others did after the war. His hair was still silver blonde, though shorter now, and his posture held that familiar blend of arrogance and control. But there was something else, a quietness that unsettled her. His eyes, pale and sharp, flicked up to meet hers with an unreadable expression. "You're late, Granger." She clenched her jaw. "I wasn't aware we were on your schedule." "Time is a matter of respect," he replied evenly, his voice softer than she remembered, but edged with the same bite. Hermione stepped forward, forcing herself not to hesitate. "You're lucky I came at all." He smirked faintly, as though expecting that. "Oh, I'm very aware. The war hero resorting to lessons from a former Death Eater, that must burn, doesn't it?" The words hit like a slap. She wanted to retort, to remind him who had chosen which side, but she caught herself. She needed this, for her research, for the greater good. "It's not about you," she said, her tone clipped. "It's about understanding the kind of magic that destroyed half our world." "Then let's hope you're ready to touch that darkness," he murmured, almost to himself. Hermione's fingers tightened on her wand. She didn't like the way he said darkness, not as a warning, but as something intimate, familiar. Draco turned away, gesturing toward the desk where several thick, weathered tomes lay open. Their pages were inked in strange, looping runes, blackened at the edges as though burned. "I gathered what the Ministry wouldn't let you see," he said. "Most of this is banned material. You so much as touch it outside this room, and they'll revoke your license faster than you can say Muggle-born." Her eyes snapped to his face, but he wasn't sneering. Not quite. The words were bitter, but they carried self-loathing more than malice. "I know the risks," she said quietly. "Do you?" He looked at her fully now, and for the first time she saw the faint tremor in his hand as he touched the page. Dark magic isn't just dangerous because it kills. It changes you. It remembers you. Every spell you cast leaves a mark, and some never fade. Hermione met his gaze steadily. "I've seen enough darkness to know what it costs. That's why I'm here." Something flickered in his eyes. Admiration, perhaps, or sorrow. And then it was gone. "Fine," he said, stepping aside. "Lesson 1, then. You wanted to understand the language of the unforgivable." The words made her chest tighten. "I don't intend to use them." He gave a dry laugh. "No one ever does." She watched as he traced his wand above the open book, whispering a phrase that made the air thicken, pulse. The candle flames bent toward him, drawn by some unseen gravity. "This," he said, "is the foundation. It's not about words. It's about intent. The dark arts feed on emotion. The purer the emotion, the stronger the spell." Hermione's pulse quickened. "You mean hatred?" He looked at her then, truly looked, and shook his head. "Not always." For a moment, silence stretched between them, taut as a drawn bowstring. She didn't understand what he meant, but the way his voice softened made her chest ache unexpectedly. He broke the gaze first, muttering a counterspell that sent the air settling again. "Your turn, Granger. Let's see if the Golden Girl can channel something darker than pity." She wanted to protest, to say this was purely academic, but a spark of defiance rose in her. She raised her wand, focusing on the script before her. Her voice faltered on the last syllable, and the spell misfired, a flicker of energy snapping across the room like a whip. Draco moved faster than thought, his hand closing around her wrist as the magic dissipated harmlessly into the wall. Their faces were close, too close. His breath brushed her cheek, his eyes bright in the dim light. "Don't," he said quietly. "Never force it. The dark arts sense fear like blood in water." Hermione swallowed hard, aware of the warmth of his hand on her skin. "You could have warned me." "I just did." He released her slowly, his touch lingering just long enough to make her heart stumble. "I see why you needed my help," he continued, turning away before she could speak. "You're brilliant, but you don't know what power feels like when it stops listening to you." She exhaled shakily, lowering her wand. "And you do?" "Yes," he said simply. "Every day." The honesty in his voice unsettled her more than any spell could. For the first time, she saw not arrogance, but weariness in him, the kind that came from carrying something heavy for far too long. As she gathered her notes, the silence between them grew thick again, humming with something unspoken. "I'll be back tomorrow," she said finally. Draco didn't look at her. "I didn't say I'd agree to a second lesson." "But you will," she replied, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. At the door, she turned back once more. He was watching her now, eyes shadowed, mouth set in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Be careful what you learn, Granger," he murmured. "Sometimes knowledge is just another curse." She left before he could see her tremble. And yet, as she climbed back into the upper corridors of the castle, Hermione realized she was already thinking about him, about the way his hand had steadied hers, the way his voice had carried both warning and pain. Dangerous, she thought. And yet, she couldn't help but want to understand him more. The real lesson, she suspected, hadn't even begun. The next evening, Hermione found herself once again descending into the lower corridors of Hogwarts. Her footsteps echoed softly, swallowed by the damp chill of the dungeons. She told herself she came for research, for knowledge, but that explanation felt thinner with every step she took. When she reached the door, it opened before she could knock. Draco stood there, wand in hand, as though he had been waiting. His expression was unreadable, but something in his eyes flickered. Surprise, perhaps, or reluctant anticipation. "You came back," he said, voice low. "I said I would." "I half expected you'd think better of it." Hermione lifted her chin. "I don't turn away from what I start." He gave a faint, humorless smile. "Still the Gryffindor motto, I see." The room looked different this time. Tidier, the dust banished, the desks rearranged into a circle. A single lantern hung from the ceiling, casting golden light that reached only partway into the shadows. A quiet, enclosed world, one that felt both safe and dangerous. Draco gestured toward the center. "Today, we try control." Hermione hesitated. "Control of what?" "Emotion," he said simply. "The heart fuels the spell, but if you let it drive you, it owns you." Dark magic answers to no one. You have to make it listen. She studied his face, pale, sharp, with that constant tension behind his calm. You speak as if it's alive. It is, he replied softly. It remembers every hand that's ever shaped it, including mine. The words made something twist in her chest. There was guilt in his tone, raw and quiet, like a scar he refused to hide. He stepped closer, his wand balanced loosely in his fingers. We'll start with something simple, a containment charm. It's meant for holding volatile energy or stopping it before it spreads. Hermione nodded, lifting her wand. Draco's voice dropped to a near whisper as he demonstrated the motion. Slow, deliberate. You have to mean every word. She followed his lead, repeating the incantation. At first, nothing happened. Then, faintly, a ripple shimmered in the air, like heat over stone. Draco's eyes widened a fraction. Good. Now hold it. Don't let it falter. She focused, every nerve straining. The shimmer brightened, trembling between her hands. Fragile, beautiful, and dangerous. Then it flickered. The energy surged, breaking free with a crack. Before she could react, Draco's hand closed over hers, grounding her. The magic collapsed, dissolving into sparks that faded into the air. Their wands clattered to the floor. For a heartbeat, they stood close, too close. Breath mingling, eyes locked. The tension between them was electric, humming through the air. I told you, he murmured, his breath ghosting her temple. It listens to your heart, lose focus, and it devours you. Hermione's pulse raced. Then why are you teaching me? His gaze softened, something unguarded breaking through. Because you're the only one who'd try to master it without being swallowed. She wanted to speak, but the words caught in her throat. He relaxed her slowly, stepping back until the space between them felt colder than before. Again, he said briskly, reclaiming his wand. You'll never control it if you're afraid of it. I'm not afraid, she said. Yes, you are. You just don't know what of. His words stung because they were true. She wasn't afraid of the magic. She was afraid of what it might reveal about her, about how easily she could be drawn to the forbidden. They practiced for hours, the rhythm between them shifting from argument to silence, from challenge to uneasy understanding. Draco's corrections were sharp, his patience limited, but when she succeeded, when the spell finally held steady, his approval was quiet, almost reverent. Well done, he said, voice barely above a whisper. You're better than I expected. Hermione allowed herself a small, breathless smile. You sound surprised. I am. Their eyes met again. For the first time, there was no hostility there, only recognition. But as quickly as it appeared, the moment shattered. Draco turned away abruptly, muttering, That's enough for today. She frowned. I'm not tired. I am. His voice was clipped, his shoulders tense. You should go. Something in his tone stopped her from arguing. She gathered her notes, watching him from the corner of her eye. His hands trembled faintly when he thought she wasn't looking. Draco, she began, but he cut her off. Don't. Whatever you're about to say, don't. She hesitated, then nodded. Fine. Tomorrow, then. He didn't answer. When she reached the door, his voice stopped her. Granger, he said softly. She turned, surprised. Don't come down here alone again after dark. The castle remembers things. She frowned. What do you mean? He didn't explain. just looked at her with that strange, haunted expression. "Good night," she said finally. He inclined his head, but didn't move until she was gone. Hermione couldn't sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the shimmer of the spell between her hands. And the way Draco had looked at her, not with disdain, but with something dangerously close to trust. It made her uneasy that she could affect him at all. She told herself it was just the intensity of their work. Two minds locked on a single goal, but her heart disagreed. By the time dawn broke, she had made a decision. The next day, she arrived early. Draco was already there, pacing near the blackboard, muttering to himself. He looked startled when she entered. "You're early," he said. "You said I shouldn't come alone after dark, so I came early." He blinked, then gave a reluctant smile. "You really don't listen, do you?" "Not when I think I'm right." Something in his expression softened, fleeting but real. "Merlin, help me," he muttered under his breath. "You're impossible." She smiled despite herself. "You keep saying that, yet here I am." He looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," he said quietly. "Here you are." The lesson that followed was quieter, gentler. There was less instruction, more conversation, about theory, about boundaries, about the way light and darkness weren't enemies, but reflections of the same truth. Hermione found herself listening, not just to his words, but to the pauses between them, to the regret that laced his explanations, to the grief he didn't name. At one point, she asked softly, "Do you ever wish you could forget it all?" Draco looked away. "Every day," he said, "but forgetting means you'd do it again." The silence that followed was heavy, intimate. When the clock in the corridor chimed noon, Hermione realized the entire morning had passed without a single argument. That was new. As she packed her books, Draco spoke without looking up. "You learn faster than anyone I've met." "Is that your way of saying thank you?" she teased. He gave a faint, humorless laugh. "Maybe." She hesitated at the door. "Same time tomorrow?" He hesitated too, then nodded. "Yes." As she walked away, she could feel his gaze following her, lingering like a shadow. She told herself again that this was about research, that it was only about the magic. But deep down, Hermione knew she was lying. Something was changing between them, something that terrified and thrilled her all at once. And though neither of them would say it yet, the lessons had already become something far more dangerous than dark magic itself. Hermione told herself it was curiosity that drew her back again. Not anticipation, not longing, curiosity. She wanted to understand the power Draco spoke of, to learn the patterns behind the chaos. That was all. But when she pushed open the dungeon door and saw him standing at the center of the room, sleeves rolled up, pale hair falling into his eyes as he scribbled notes across the blackboard, her pulse quickened in a way that had nothing to do with curiosity. He didn't look up right away. "You're early again." "You always seem surprised by that," she said, setting her satchel down. Draco turned, wand balanced between his fingers. His gaze swept over her, cool but measured. "Old habits. I've learned not to expect people to come back after spending time with me." The quiet honesty in his tone threw her off. "I'm not people," she said before thinking. Something flickered in his expression. Amusement, maybe, or something softer. "No," he said. "You never were." For a moment, the silence between them was charged, fragile. Then he cleared his throat, gesturing to the circle of runes drawn on the stone floor. Today's lesson is about resistance. How to stand your ground against a spell that wants to control you. She nodded, stepping closer. The runes pulsed faintly, dark light flickering beneath her shoes. It looks alive. It is, Draco said. It responds to intent. That's why it's dangerous. He drew a deep breath. If I cast this correctly, it will try to bind you, not harm, but contain. You'll need to break free. Hermione froze. You're going to use it on me? He nodded, calm but distant. You wanted to learn the dark arts, Granger. This is what they feel like when they look back at you. Her mouth went dry, but she raised her chin. Do it. His wand moved sharply, his voice cutting through the air like ice. The spell unfurled, invisible threads snapping around her wrists, her chest, her throat. Not suffocating, but pressing, testing. Hermione's heart pounded. The instinct to fight was immediate, desperate. But when she strained against the magic, it tightened. Stop resisting with your body, Draco said. It's not strength that frees you. It's clarity. You have to unmake the command. She struggled to focus, the magic whispering at the edges of her mind, demanding surrender. It feels like... I know, he said quickly. Don't let it in. It feeds on doubt. Use your will. You're stronger than it. His voice grounded her. Hermione closed her eyes, picturing the threads not as chains, but as smoke. She breathed, slow and steady, and whispered the counterphrase. The bindings dissolved in a rush of cold air. When she opened her eyes, Draco was staring at her, expression unreadable. You broke it faster than I expected, he said quietly. I had a good teacher. He laughed, softly, unexpectedly, and for the first time, it wasn't cruel. Careful, Granger. Flattery sounds strange coming from you. Get used to it, Malfoy. Something about the way she said his name made him still. You say it differently now. She frowned. Differently? Like it doesn't taste like venom anymore. Her cheeks flushed. Don't be ridiculous. Am I? His tone was teasing, but his eyes were serious. Maybe you're starting to see what's behind the name. Hermione opened her mouth to respond, but he had already turned away, sweeping his wand across the floor to erase the runes. Again, tomorrow, he said. You need to strengthen your control. She hesitated. Is that what this is? Control? Draco paused. It's what's left when everything else has been stripped away. He didn't look back as he left the room, and Hermione was left staring at the fading marks on the stone, her pulse still racing from more than magic. Over the next week, their lessons became a rhythm, a strange, secret world that belonged only to them. By day, Hermione was the model scholar, quiet and composed at her ministry desk. But by night, she descended into shadows, where Draco waited, where the rules she had lived by no longer felt so clear. The dungeons became their confessional. Sometimes they argued, fiercely, voices echoing off the cold walls. You think darkness can be used like a tool, Hermione said one night, frustration tightening her voice. But it's poison, Draco. It corrupts everything it touches. And yet, here you are, trying to wield it, he shot back. Tell me, Granger, when you cast your first curse, did you feel the corruption, or did you feel powerful? She froze. The truth she didn't want to admit shimmered between them. It doesn't matter what I felt. It matters more than anything. His gaze pierced her. That's the first lesson of the dark arts. They tempt you not because they're evil, but because they make you feel alive. His words unsettled her. They were dangerous because they were true. And yet, even when anger burned between them, it was laced with something deeper. Fascination, tension, a pull she couldn't name. When he moved close to correct her wand movement, she caught the faint scent of smoke and cedar on his robes. When his fingers brushed hers, guiding the shape of a spell, she felt warmth, not cold. One night, after hours of practice, she collapsed onto a chair, exhausted. "You push too hard," she said breathlessly. Draco leaned against the desk, arms crossed. "You wouldn't be here if you wanted easy lessons?" She smiled faintly. "You sound like you almost respect me." "I do," he said simply. The honesty in his tone caught her off guard. She studied him, the faint shadows beneath his eyes, the way his jaw tightened when he wasn't speaking. "Why are you really doing this, Draco? It can't just be about helping me." He looked away, silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "Maybe I want to prove I can still do something right." Hermione's heart softened despite herself. "You already are." He met her gaze, something flickering behind his calm mask, something fragile, unguarded. "Careful, Granger. You'll make me believe it." "I mean it," she said softly. He stepped closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "And what happens if I start believing you?" She didn't answer. The question hung between them, heavy and dangerous. He broke the moment first, straightening. "Go. It's late. Draco, go." His voice was firm now, but his eyes betrayed him, full of things he couldn't say. Hermione left, but that night she couldn't stop replaying his voice in her mind. "What happens if I start believing you?" She didn't know the answer, only that it scared her, because for the first time, she wanted him to. The following evening, she returned again. She always did. He was waiting by the window, pale moonlight catching the side of his face. "You shouldn't keep coming back," he said without turning. "Then stop opening the door." He exhaled, half a sigh, half a laugh. "You don't make things easy." "I thought you liked difficult things." This time, when he looked at her, the ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You have no idea." The air between them crackled. Tension, danger, something too fragile to name. And though neither reached for the other, both felt it. The slow, inexorable pull drawing them closer, lesson by lesson, secret by secret. Whatever line had once divided them, light and dark, hate and understanding, was blurring. And somewhere deep inside, Hermione began to realize that the most perilous spell she was learning was not one written in any book. It was him. Rain lashed against the high windows of the dungeon, each drop echoing faintly in the silence that filled the room. The flicker of candlelight painted gold on stone, on parchment, on the sharp lines of Draco's face as he leaned over the desk. Hermione stood beside him, her quill hovering above her notes, pretending to be calm while her pulse refused to settle. It had been 3 weeks since they'd started. 3 weeks of late nights and whispered spells, and the slow unraveling of everything she'd believed she knew about him. "Your concentration's slipping," Draco said without looking up. Hermione bristled. "I'm listening." "You're pretending to listen." He turned to her, eyes pale and sharp. "Dark magic notices pretense. It will find your weakness before you do." "And you speak as if you know mine," she challenged. He hesitated, gaze flickering down to her lips before he forced it away. I know distraction when I see it. The words hung between them, dangerous and close. Hermione's throat tightened. Then maybe you should stop being one. His mouth curved slightly. Careful, Granger. That almost sounded like flirting. She stepped back, heat rushing to her face. You're insufferable. And you're blushing, he murmured. Because you're impossible. He smirked, but there was no malice in it now. Only something quiet, curious. You didn't always talk back to me like this. That was before I realized you're not half as intimidating as you think you are. Draco tilted his head, studying her. You've changed. War does that, she said softly. Something in his expression shifted. A flicker of guilt, or perhaps recognition? Yes, he said, barely audible. It does. For a while, neither spoke. The storm outside filled the silence, its rhythm steady and relentless. Draco reached for a book, flipping through the pages until he found what he wanted. Tonight, he said, we'll work on projection, controlling your intent so it shapes the spell instead of consuming it. Hermione nodded, grateful for the return to formality, though her pulse was still uneven. He moved closer, the edge of his sleeve brushing hers as he guided her hand. Think of it like breathing, he said. The magic doesn't come from force, it comes from focus. She inhaled, trying to follow his rhythm, their hands moving together in the same arc. The spell shimmered faintly, light bending between them, gold streaking into shadow. Then she felt it. Not magic, but something warmer. The awareness of his body near hers, the steady cadence of his breath, the soft rasp of his voice when he said her name. Good, he murmured. You're holding it steady. She opened her eyes. His face was close enough that she could see the faint trace of a scar near his jaw, the one that had never quite healed. Without thinking, she whispered, What happened there? His hand faltered. A curse I didn't dodge fast enough. During the war? He hesitated, then nodded. I didn't earn it heroically, if that's what you're asking. I wasn't. Draco's eyes flicked to hers, surprised by her gentleness. You should be, he said, almost bitterly. You were born to judge. I was born to understand, Hermione corrected. The words seemed to reach him. For a moment, his posture softened, the tension easing from his shoulders. But then, as always, he pulled back. Understanding doesn't fix what I've done. No, she said, but it changes what you do next. He said nothing. Instead, he took a slow breath and gestured for her to continue. Again, he said. They practiced until the candles burned low. When at last the spell dissolved into a faint shimmer of smoke, Hermione's arms trembled from exhaustion. That's enough, he said, voice softer now. You've done well. Coming from you, that's practically high praise. Don't get used to it, he said, but there was the ghost of a smile on his lips. Hermione gathered her notes, feeling a strange ache in her chest. Draco, she began, then stopped. He looked up. What? I keep thinking, she said carefully, that you're trying to atone for something no one asked you to. His eyes darkened. You think I shouldn't? I think you already are, she said quietly, just by being here. He stared at her for a long time, then said, almost to himself, You always see what you shouldn't. Before she could respond, thunder shook the walls, and the room dimmed as the last of the candles flickered out. Lumos, Draco said, but the spell sputtered and died. Hermione frowned. That's strange. A low hum rippled through the air. The runes they'd drawn earlier glowed faintly, the remnants of their lesson reacting to the surge of storm magic outside. "Don't move," Draco said quickly. "The circle's unstable." But Hermione had already stepped forward. If it activates, it could damage the entire... The floor pulsed beneath her feet, a surge of energy flaring upward. Draco reached her just as the light burst, catching her around the waist, pulling her clear. The blast hit the far wall, scattering shards of stone and magic into the air. When the glow faded, she found herself on the floor, his body half over hers, his hands still gripping her arm. "Are you hurt?" he asked, breathless. "I'm fine," she managed. "You?" He nodded, though a thin line of blood marked his cheek. Without thinking, she reached up, brushing it away with her thumb. His breath caught. Her fingers lingered longer than they should have, tracing the curve of his jaw. "You shouldn't have done that." He gave a small, wry smile. "What? Save you? Risk yourself." He looked at her then, really looked, and for a moment the guarded walls behind his eyes faltered. Maybe I needed to. Their faces were inches apart, breath mingling, the world outside reduced to silence. Hermione felt the pull before she understood it, the magnetic inevitability of two people who had been circling each other too long. But before the moment could break, Draco pushed himself up, retreating so quickly it hurt to watch. "You should go," he said hoarsely. She sat up, heart pounding. "Draco, go." His voice was low, almost pleading. "Before I forget why you shouldn't stay." For once, she didn't argue. She gathered her things, her hands trembling slightly. At the doorway, she paused. He was standing with his back to her, one hand braced on the desk, shoulders tense as if holding back an invisible tide. "Thank you," she said softly. He didn't turn, but his voice followed her out into the corridor. "Don't thank me. I never do the right thing twice." The door shut between them with a quiet click. Hermione walked through the dim halls, her pulse still echoing in her ears. She tried to steady her thoughts, to remind herself this was dangerous, foolish, impossible. And yet, as the rain whispered against the castle walls, she knew she'd be back. She always came back. Whatever bound them, anger, curiosity, guilt, it was no longer something she could untangle. And somewhere deep inside, in the silence between heartbeats, Hermione Granger realized the truth she could no longer deny. She was falling for him. Days passed, and still Hermione found herself walking the same path through the castle at dusk, her footsteps echoing down the stone corridors toward the same forbidden classroom. Each time she told herself this would be the last, that she'd learned enough, that there was nothing more to gain, and each time she lied. When she entered, Draco was already there, as if he'd been waiting. He didn't greet her right away. He stood by the window, pale light catching on his hair, and when he finally turned, his eyes were unreadable. "You came," he said quietly. "You expected me not to?" He gave a faint, tired smile. "I wasn't sure which one of us was smart enough to stop." Hermione closed the door behind her. "Apparently, neither." Draco didn't answer, but the corner of his mouth lifted slightly before he turned back to the desk. "We'll try something different today." He gestured to a silver basin, a pensive, smaller and darker than the kind she'd seen before. The surface shimmered with faint, shadowy ripples. Hermione frowned. "What is that?" "A mirror of memory," he said. "But it doesn't show what was. It shows what still clings." She hesitated. "That sounds dangerous." "It is." His tone was flat. That's why we use it." He moved closer, explaining the theory with clinical precision. "The basin," he said, "could draw residual traces of dark energy from a person, the remnants of fear, anger, guilt. Most wizards never realized how much of their magic carried those fragments." "You think I have those?" Hermione said, almost challenging. Draco's eyes flicked to hers. "Everyone does." He held her gaze for a long moment, then looked away. "Especially me." Before she could respond, he took a small vial from his pocket and poured a few drops into the basin. The surface flared briefly, glowing with a faint crimson hue. "What do you see?" he asked. Hermione leaned forward, peering into the swirling liquid. Shapes formed, indistinct at first, then clearer. Flashes of fire, shouting, the sound of spells colliding. She recognized the Battle of Hogwarts, the faces of friends and enemies, the fear that had once lived in her bones. She pulled back sharply, breath catching. "That's your fear," Draco finished. "Still alive." He reached out, his hand hovering near hers but not touching. "The dark arts feed on it. That's why they're drawn to you." "To me," she whispered. "Or to anyone who feels." His eyes softened. "You feel too much. You always did." Hermione swallowed hard, the memory still burning behind her eyes. "And you?" she asked. "What do you see when you look in it?" Draco hesitated. Then, slowly, he poured another drop of potion into the basin and bent over it. The light shifted from crimson to black. Hermione saw flashes again. A young boy's face, terrified. A dark mark searing pale skin. His mother's tears. A wand shaking in his hand as a voice demanded, "Do it, Draco." "Stop," she said. But he didn't. His jaw tightened, his breath coming faster, as if the memory was dragging him under. Hermione reached for him, grabbing his wrist. The moment she touched him, the basin went still, the darkness vanishing, leaving only silence. He looked up, his face pale, eyes wide. "You shouldn't have done that," he said hoarsely. "Then you shouldn't have shown me," she whispered. He pulled away, pacing to the far side of the room, his hands trembling. "You think you understand me now? You think a glimpse makes you my confessor?" "I didn't ask to see," she said sharply. "But you did." He turned on her, anger flaring through the exhaustion in his voice. "You always do. You dig until there's nothing left." Hermione stared at him, her own anger rising. "Maybe I'm trying to understand why you keep punishing yourself for a war you didn't start." His laugh was cold. "Didn't I? I made my choices. I chose the mark. I stood beside monsters. You were 16. He froze, startled by her sudden fierceness. "You were a child," she continued, voice trembling. "And you paid for it, every day since. You don't get to keep torturing yourself and calling it penance." The silence that followed was sharp, brittle. Then Draco whispered, "And what if I don't know how to stop?" Something broke inside her. She crossed the distance between them before she could think, placing a hand on his arm. "Then let someone help you." He looked down at her hand, as though it were a foreign thing. His voice was barely audible. "You shouldn't touch me." "Why not?" "Because it makes me want things I can't have." The air shifted, heavy, electric. Hermione's breath caught as his eyes met hers. There was no mask now, no sarcasm, only raw, aching honesty. She didn't move her hand. "You think this is just about magic," he said, his voice breaking. "But it's not. You're dangerous, Granger. You make me remember what it felt like to want to be good." "Then want it," she said. His laugh was soft, disbelieving. "It's not that simple." It is, if you stop running from it. Her words hung in the air like a spell neither dared break. He stepped closer, slowly, as if drawn against his will. She felt the warmth of his breath, the brush of his sleeve against her arm. For a moment, the world narrowed to that single point between them, the distance that could vanish if one of them moved. But then he drew back suddenly, the walls slamming down again. "You should go." Hermione's voice trembled. "Every time I try to reach you, you shut me out. Because if I don't, I won't stop," he said, his voice raw. "And I can't afford that." She swallowed hard. "You think you're protecting me?" "I know I am." He turned away, his shoulders rigid, his hands clenched at his sides. For a long moment, she simply watched him. The boy who had once been her enemy, now standing before her as a man breaking under the weight of his own redemption. "I'll be back tomorrow," she said quietly. He didn't look at her. "Don't." She ignored him and left, the echo of his words following her into the corridor. That night, Hermione sat by her fire, staring into the flames until her eyes stung. She thought of the way his voice had cracked when he said he couldn't stop, the way he had looked at her as if she were both salvation and ruin. She hated him for pushing her away. She hated herself more for wanting to go back. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled again, the same storm that never seemed to leave them. And in that sound, she understood something she hadn't before. This wasn't a battle of light against dark anymore. It was a battle of hearts, both too scarred to trust, both too stubborn to surrender. But love, she realized, was its own kind of forbidden magic, and she was already learning it from the one man she'd been taught to fear. Hermione told herself she would stay away. She even managed 2 nights, 2 sleepless, restless nights of pacing her flat and telling herself that she was doing the right thing. But on the 3rd evening, as the sun sank beyond the castle hills and the shadows lengthened across the grounds, her resolve cracked like thin glass. When she arrived at the dungeon door, Draco was there again, as if he had known she'd come. He looked tired, his hair slightly disheveled, the faintest trace of stubble on his jaw. His wand arm hung loosely at his side, and his eyes were darker than she'd ever seen them. "You don't listen," he said softly. "No," she replied. "I never have." For a moment, they just stood there, a silence thick with everything unsaid. Then Draco turned, wordlessly motioning for her to follow. The room was darker tonight, lit by only a few scattered candles. On the desk lay several open tomes, their pages filled with dense Latin and darker illustrations. "What are we working on?" she asked, setting her satchel down. He didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was low, guarded. "A spell of concealment. It hides intent, shields the mind from detection." Hermione frowned. "Occlumency?" "More than that," he said. "It doesn't just protect your thoughts. It protects your heart." She hesitated. "You think I need that?" "I think," he said quietly, "that you already have it. I'm only trying to teach you to control it." Something in his tone made her chest tighten. She forced a steady breath. "All right, show me." He stepped closer, so close she could feel the heat of his body. His fingers brushed her wrist as he guided her wand upward, his touch light but steady. "This spell doesn't use words," he murmured. "It's intent, focus. You have to imagine a wall around your thoughts, one that nothing can pierce." She tried. The first attempt faltered, the energy slipping through her grasp like smoke. Draco's hand came up, resting over hers. Don't force it, he whispered. You're trying to fight it. You don't fight the mind, you quiet it. Hermione closed her eyes. His voice, his breath, the warmth of his hand, all of it drew her in. She focused not on the wall he described, but on the sound of his heartbeat, steady and close. When she opened her eyes again, the air around them shimmered faintly, like glass catching light. Draco's gaze flicked to hers, surprise flashing there. You did it, he said softly. I did, he nodded. It's faint, but real. His eyes lingered on her face. You learn too fast for your own good. She smiled despite herself. Jealous, he huffed a quiet laugh. Terrified. Their eyes held. For a heartbeat, she felt the world narrow again. Just the two of them, and the soft hum of magic between their hands. Then, as if remembering himself, Draco stepped back. The shimmer around them cracked and vanished. Again, tomorrow, he said, his voice brisk, but the tremor beneath it betrayed him. Hermione tilted her head. You keep saying that, but you never tell me why you keep showing up. He froze. Maybe I don't know anymore. Her voice softened. Then find out. That night, after she left, Draco didn't move for a long time. Her scent lingered in the air, parchment and rain. He pressed a hand to the desk, breathing deeply, as if steadying himself against a storm only he could feel. He had thought he was teaching her control, but every lesson stripped another layer from him instead. Each time she looked at him with those clear, unguarded eyes, something inside him shifted. He didn't want to admit what it was. Not yet, maybe not ever. But he felt it, clawing its way through the walls he'd built around himself. She made him remember the boy he might have been, if the world had given him a choice. And it terrified him. The next day, Hermione arrived early again. Draco looked up from his desk, startled. You're relentless, he said. I'm consistent, she corrected, smiling faintly. He gestured toward the chalkboard, where he'd written a list of spells in flowing script. Today, we'll test your control. You'll cast the shield, and I'll try to break it. She blinked. You'll what? He smirked. Don't look so alarmed, Granger. I'll go easy on you. I doubt that. Good. You shouldn't. He raised his wand before she could protest. Ready? The first spell hit like a gust of wind, invisible but heavy, pressing against her mind. Hermione steadied herself, focusing on the quiet inside her, on the shield he'd taught her to create. The second wave came harder, sharper, his voice low, the incantations clipped and precise. Good, he said between spells. Hold it. Don't let me in. She could feel him pressing against the edges of her thoughts, his presence sharp and familiar. It wasn't just power, it was him, his guilt, his restraint, his constant hunger for control. And suddenly, she understood. He wasn't testing her, he was testing himself. Draco, stop, she said, her voice strained. He didn't. You can take it. The pressure intensified. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Draco! At her cry, the spell broke. The force shattered, sending a ripple through the room. Hermione stumbled, but he caught her before she fell. Their eyes met, his wide with horror. I didn't mean... I know, she said, breathless. He was still holding her, one hand on her back, the other at her waist. Their faces were inches apart, and for the first time, he didn't pull away. I could have hurt you, he murmured. You didn't. His hand trembled slightly against her. I wanted to see how far I could go. Then you should know, she said softly. That I trust you more than you trust yourself." He stared at her, the words cutting through him like a spell. "You shouldn't." Maybe not. She could feel the conflict in him, the push and pull, warmth and restraint, desire and denial. The air between them burned with it. Then, with quiet certainty, she lifted her hand and touched his cheek. His breath caught. "Why do you keep fighting it?" she whispered. "Because if I stop, I'll ruin everything." "You already did," she said, voice trembling. "You ruined my peace, my logic, every reason I had to stay away." His eyes searched hers, desperate, lost. "And if I ruin you?" "You won't." The silence that followed was electric. Then, slowly, as if drawn by a force neither could resist, Draco leaned in. His lips brushed hers, barely, a whisper of contact, more question than claim. It wasn't a kiss. Not really. It was a promise. Fragile, dangerous, inevitable. When he pulled back, his voice was unsteady. "We can't." Hermione's eyes were bright with something that wasn't tears. "I know." Neither moved. The candles flickered, the air humming with magic neither of them had cast. It felt like the world was holding its breath, as if even the castle itself knew what it had just witnessed. Draco stepped back at last, his jaw tight. "Go, Hermione." She hesitated. "If I do, this won't stop." "I know." His voice was low, resigned. "That's why you should go now." She turned, but before leaving, she whispered, "Tomorrow, then." He didn't answer, but when she was gone, his hand rose to his lips, as if to remember the warmth that still lingered there. And for the first time in years, Draco Malfoy allowed himself to hope, and to fear it in equal measure. The next morning dawned grey, thick fog curling low around the castle grounds. Hermione had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt again the ghost of his breath against her lips. Not a kiss, not truly, but something that burned deeper than any spell. She told herself it was a mistake, that they had crossed a line that shouldn't be crossed. Yet when evening came, she found herself once again walking toward the dungeons. The air there always felt different, denser somehow, as if it carried all the unsaid words and forbidden thoughts that had soaked into the walls. She hesitated at the door, her hand hovering over the handle, half hoping it would be locked. It wasn't. Draco looked up when she entered. He was standing by the chalkboard, writing with his wand, the runes flaring briefly before fading. His expression was unreadable, his posture rigid. The tension in the room was nearly tangible. "You shouldn't have come," he said without turning. Hermione set her satchel down, her heartbeat loud in her ears. "And yet, here I am." He gave a humorless smile. "You're going to be the death of me." "Then you should stop opening the door," she countered. He finally turned, eyes locking on hers. For a moment, the silence between them was louder than words. "I tried," he said simply. "It didn't work." That admission broke something open inside her. "Then don't try anymore." He blinked, startled by her honesty. "Hermione." "No," she interrupted, her voice trembling but firm. "I'm tired of pretending this is only about the magic. We both know it isn't." Draco's jaw tightened. "You don't understand what you're asking." "Then explain it to me." His eyes darkened. "You think I don't want to? You think I haven't spent every night convincing myself to stop before I destroy the only good thing left in my life?" The words hit her like a physical force. "Then stop thinking and feel something for once." He closed the distance between them in 2 steps, his hands braced against the edge of the desk on either side of her. "You don't know what you're saying." "I do," she whispered. "You're just afraid to hear it." His breath was unsteady. "Afraid? You think fear is what's stopping me?" "Yes." Her eyes didn't waver. "You're terrified of being seen, really seen, because if someone does, you'll have to stop hating yourself." The silence that followed was raw, painful. Then Draco exhaled, the fight leaving him all at once. "You make it sound easy." "It isn't," she said softly, "but it's possible." For a long time, he didn't move. Then his hand came up, slow, hesitant, and brushed a stray curl from her cheek. The touch was feather-light, reverent, as if he didn't trust himself not to shatter her. "Hermione," he said quietly, her name sounding almost like a plea. "If I start this, I won't be able to stop. Then don't." The world tilted. His lips found hers, this time fully, completely, no hesitation left between them. The kiss was not gentle. It was fierce, born of restraint breaking after too long. She clutched at his robes, pulling him closer, as if she could anchor herself to him. His hands framed her face, trembling slightly, the weight of years of silence pouring into a single moment. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. He stared at her, eyes wild, voice rough. "This is wrong." "It feels like the first thing that isn't," she replied. He laughed once, soft and disbelieving. "You always did have terrible timing." "You're the one who kept me waiting," she said, smiling faintly through her tears. His expression gentled. He reached for her hand, thumb tracing small circles against her skin. "You have no idea what you've done to me." "Maybe I do." He leaned his forehead against hers, eyes closing. "Tell me this isn't madness." She didn't answer, just let her fingers curl into his sleeve, holding on to the only truth that mattered. They didn't speak of it the next day. They returned to their lessons as though nothing had changed, yet everything had. Every glance lingered too long. Every brush of hands carried unspoken meaning. Hermione noticed how he watched her when he thought she wasn't looking. Not with arrogance, but with awe, as if he still couldn't believe she was there. One evening, after hours of practice, she leaned against the wall, exhaustion and emotion twisting together. "You hide behind guilt like it's armor," she said quietly. "And you hide behind purpose," he countered, "as if that makes you any less afraid." She smiled faintly. "Maybe we're both cowards then." He looked at her for a long moment, then shook his head. "No, you're the bravest person I've ever known." The sincerity in his voice made her heart stutter. "That's not true." "It is," he said, stepping closer. "You walked into darkness to understand it. Most people run the other way." "And you stayed there," she whispered. He gave a bitter smile. "Someone had to. Not anymore." The quiet between them stretched again, fragile and full. He reached out, brushing the back of his fingers along her jaw. The touch was almost reverent. "You make me forget," he murmured. "Forget what?" "Everything," he said. "Who I was, what I did, what I'm supposed to be." "Maybe that's what redemption feels like," she whispered. His eyes searched hers, weary, longing, unbelieving. "You make it sound like I deserve it. Everyone does." He let out a shaky breath, a half laugh. "You and your impossible mercy." "Someone has to have it," she said, smiling softly. "And I've always been stubborn." He shook his head, but his smile, small, genuine, told her she'd won that argument. They spent the rest of the night in quiet conversation, the kind that feels like breathing after being underwater too long. They spoke of things neither had ever dared voice: his nightmares, her doubts, the weight of memory that never seemed to fade. And though no spells were cast that night, Hermione felt something shift, something deeper than magic. By the time dawn crept through the cracks in the windows, Draco had fallen asleep, his head resting against the back of the chair, the lines of tension in his face finally eased. Hermione watched him, heart full and aching. In sleep, he looked younger, softer, human. She reached out, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead, her fingers lingering for a moment longer than they should have. He stirred, but didn't wake. "Tomorrow," she whispered, more to herself than him. "I'll tell you what this means." But even as she said it, she knew the truth. She already loved him, hopelessly, dangerously, completely. And when morning light touched his face, she realized that love, too, could be a kind of dark magic. Not the kind that destroyed, but the kind that bound two souls in a way no spell ever could. The following days blurred together in a haze of stolen hours and unspoken feelings. Hermione's every step toward the dungeons carried both dread and anticipation. Every evening, a battle between reason and the pull she couldn't resist. Draco no longer tried to stop her. He would glance up when she entered, his expression unreadable, then look away as if pretending nothing had changed. Yet the air between them was thick with something fragile and electric. They still practiced, still spoke of spells and theory, but each lesson was a pretext. Every movement, every word carried an undercurrent, a question they were both too afraid to ask. That evening, Hermione arrived later than usual. The castle was quiet, the corridors hushed beneath the steady drumming of rain. When she opened the door, Draco was pacing, his wand clutched tightly in his hand. A small storm of frustration gathered around him. "You're late," he said without turning. "You sound almost worried," she replied, dropping her satchel. He gave a short, humorless laugh. "Worry implies I still believe I can change the outcome." Hermione frowned. "You're talking like there's something to lose." "There's everything to lose," he said sharply, then caught himself. "Forget it. Sit down." She didn't. "No. Tell me what you mean." Draco's gaze met hers, grey and tired. "You think this can last? That the world won't tear it apart the moment it finds out?" "I don't care about the world." "You should." He stepped closer, his voice low. "It cares about you. You're their symbol, the girl who fought for light. And me? I'm everything they fear." "Maybe that's why we understand each other," she said quietly. He hesitated, the tension in his shoulders easing just a little. "You shouldn't have to understand me. Maybe I want to." The silence that followed was heavy. He looked at her, really looked, and she saw it in his eyes again, that constant battle between longing and guilt. "Why do you keep coming back?" he asked, barely above a whisper. "Because when I'm here, the world makes sense," she admitted, "even when it shouldn't." He closed his eyes as if the confession hurt to hear. "You deserve better than this, better than me." Hermione's voice softened. "Stop deciding what I deserve." He opened his eyes again, something fragile breaking in them. "You have no idea how hard it is not to touch you right now." She took a step closer, her heart pounding. "Then don't fight it." Draco froze. His hand trembled at his side. "You don't know what you're asking." "I do." She lifted her chin. "And so do you." For a moment, they simply stared at each other, two souls on the edge of something too big to name. Then he moved. It wasn't a kiss this time, not immediately. He reached for her hand first, almost cautiously, as though to make sure she was real. His fingers slid between hers, tentative, reverent. Her breath caught. Draco? He looked at her, and all the restraint he'd held crumbled. The kiss was slower this time, deliberate, not born of impulse, but of surrender. His hand cupped the back of her neck, his thumb brushing the edge of her jaw, and she melted into him. For once, there was no fear, no pretense of control, only the truth neither of them could escape anymore. When they parted, she rested her forehead against his chest, listening to the rapid beat of his heart. "Still think this is wrong?" she murmured. He laughed softly, the sound rough. "Absolutely. And yet, he echoed, pulling her closer. For the first time, the darkness around them didn't feel oppressive. It felt like a cocoon, fragile, secret, theirs. They didn't talk about what happened afterward. The next few days passed in quiet rhythm. Lessons, long silences, glances that said everything words couldn't. Hermione found herself memorizing small things. The way his voice softened when he forgot to hide it. The rare, unguarded moments when his smile reached his eyes. But the calm couldn't last. One evening, as she approached the dungeons, she found the door already open. Inside, Draco stood before the desk, speaking in low, tense tones to someone, a shadowed figure she couldn't immediately place. "Told you to stay away from this," the voice said. Hermione froze. Professor Snape's portrait hung near the corner wall, his dark eyes gleaming faintly. Draco's tone was tight. "You think I don't know what I'm doing?" "You're playing with fire," Snape's voice hissed, "and dragging her into it. You of all people should understand how this ends." Hermione's breath caught. Draco's shoulders stiffened, but his answer was calm. "Maybe it ends differently this time." Snape's painted brow arched. "You sound like your mother." Draco's hand tightened around his wand. "Take that as a compliment." Snape's sigh echoed like a whisper of wind. "You cannot rewrite what the world expects of you, Draco. People like her will always be light. People like us, we live in shadow." "That's your curse," Draco said. "Not mine." The portrait went silent. Hermione stepped forward, revealing herself. Draco spun, startled. "You heard that?" he said quietly. "Every word." His expression shifted, anger, then defeat. "You shouldn't have." "Because you don't want me to know you still think you're damned?" she asked. He turned away. "I am." "No," she said, crossing the room. "You're just afraid of being forgiven." "Stop," he said, voice cracking. "Why? Because it's true? Because I don't deserve it." His shout echoed off the stone, harsh and raw, then softer. "Not after everything I've done." Hermione's heart ached at the sight of him, proud, broken, refusing to see the man she saw before her. She reached up, forcing him to meet her gaze. "Maybe it's not about deserving," she said quietly. "Maybe it's about what you do now." His breath came unsteady. "And what am I supposed to do now, Hermione?" "Stop running from what's already yours." He stared at her, and in that moment, something in him yielded. Not to magic, not to logic, but to her. He kissed her again, harder this time, desperate, as if trying to drown the ghosts in his chest. Her hands tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, and for a fleeting, perfect instant, there was no past, no war, no guilt, only the fierce, impossible present. When they broke apart, both were shaking. He pressed his forehead to hers, whispering, "If I lose control, promise me you'll stop me." She smiled faintly, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "You don't scare me, Draco." "Then you're a fool." "Probably." She brushed her thumb across his cheek, wiping away the trace of tears he hadn't realized had fallen. "But maybe that's what love is." He closed his eyes. "Don't say that." "Why not?" "Because once you do, I'll never be able to let you go." She leaned closer, her voice barely a breath. "Then don't." Outside, the rain began to fall harder, beating against the windows like a heartbeat. In that quiet, sealed world beneath the castle, Hermione and Draco stood entwined. Two souls who had been enemies, survivors, and now something far more dangerous. Hope made flesh. Neither knew what came next, but for the first time, neither cared. Whatever darkness they faced, they would face it together. The days that followed were both a refuge and a torment. Hermione could no longer separate the lessons from the feelings that pulsed beneath them. Every night in the dungeons became another step deeper into something she knew she shouldn't want, and yet did, with every breath. Draco had changed. His edges had softened, his silences had grown longer, and sometimes when he looked at her, there was a quiet tenderness that scared her more than his temper ever could. It was as if he was learning to let himself feel again, and it was breaking him open, piece by piece. That evening she found him seated at the desk, the candlelight throwing long shadows across his face. He didn't look up as she entered, only said, "I thought you wouldn't come tonight." "I always come," she replied, setting her notes aside. "You should know that by now." He smiled faintly, but there was sadness in it. "That's exactly what worries me." Hermione frowned. "You talk like you expect me to leave." "I expect you'll have to." "Why?" He looked at her then, really looked, and the distance in his eyes made her heart ache. "Because good things don't last for people like me." "People like you?" she echoed, stepping closer. "You're not your father, Draco." The name hit like a spark, and his expression darkened. "No, I'm worse. At least he never pretended to be anything else." "That's not true," she said, her voice rising. "You're trying. You've been trying since the war ended." He shook his head. "Trying doesn't erase what's already written." Hermione placed her hands on the desk, leaning forward. "You think I care about the past? I was there. I know what happened. You saved lives that night." "Too few," he said flatly, "and far too late." She exhaled sharply, fighting the urge to shout. "You keep punishing yourself for surviving." His jaw tightened. "Someone has to." Hermione took another step forward. "Then let me carry some of it." That stopped him. For a moment his eyes softened, as if her words had struck something buried deep. He stood, closing the distance between them until she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "Why do you care so much?" he whispered. "Because you make it impossible not to," she admitted. He reached out, fingertips brushing her cheek. The touch was hesitant, reverent. "You shouldn't say things like that to me." "Why not?" "Because it makes me forget who I am." Hermione's breath caught. Maybe that's the point. Something shifted in him then. The walls he'd built, the careful restraint. It all cracked under the weight of her words. His hand slid to the back of her neck, pulling her closer, and she rose to meet him halfway. The kiss was slow this time, deliberate and deep, a quiet promise that spoke louder than words. he tasted of regret and rain and something fragile that felt like hope. When they broke apart, she rested her head against his chest, feeling his heartbeat hammer beneath her palm. "Tell me what you're thinking," she whispered. He laughed softly, without humor. "That this can't end well. And yet you're still here." "And yet," he echoed, his voice rough. They stood in silence, the storm outside pressing against the castle walls. For a long time, it felt like they were the only two people in the world, the scholar who sought light and the sinner who had lived too long in shadow. But peace never lasted long between them. The next day, Hermione received a letter from the ministry, official parchment stamped with the seal of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. They were investigating unauthorized dark magic activity within Hogwarts. Someone had reported it. Her heart dropped. When she told Draco, his face went pale. "They'll trace it back to me," he said quietly. "They always do." "No," Hermione said quickly. "I'll handle it." He gave a bitter laugh. "You can't protect me from this, Hermione." "Yes, I can," she insisted. "I'll tell them it was for research, that I needed your expertise." "And you'll ruin your own reputation to save mine," he said. "Do you hear how absurd that sounds?" She met his eyes. "I don't care." Draco turned away, running a hand through his hair. "You should. You've built something real, something good. Don't throw it away for me." "I'm not," she said softly. "I'm choosing you." He went still. When he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. "You shouldn't have said that." "Why not?" "Because I can't be what you need me to be." Hermione reached out, gripping his arm. "You already are." He looked at her hand on his sleeve, then up at her face, something like agony flickering in his eyes. "You don't understand. If they come for me, I'll go. I won't let them take you down with me. You can't just disappear. Watch me. Draco." But he was already moving, gathering the scattered books, muttering spells under his breath. She could see it, the old Malfoy walls rising again, the instinct to vanish before he could be hurt. "You promised me," she said, her voice breaking. "You said you wouldn't run from this." He stopped, his back to her. "I said I'd teach you, Hermione. I never promised I'd stay." Tears stung her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "You're a coward." "I know." That single admission hit harder than any argument. He turned, his expression raw and unguarded. "You think this is easy for me? You think I don't—" He broke off, shaking his head. "If I stay, they'll destroy you." "Then let them try," she said fiercely. "I've fought worse than them." For a heartbeat, silence stretched between them. Then, slowly, he crossed the room and cupped her face in his hands. His touch trembled. "You'll never forgive me for this," he whispered. "Try me." And then, just like that, he kissed her one last time. It was not the desperate hunger of before, but something quieter, final, almost gentle. A goodbye. When he pulled away, she knew. He didn't have to say the words. By morning, he was gone. The classroom was empty. The books vanished. Every trace of him erased with the precision of someone who had planned for this. Only one thing remained, a folded scrap of parchment on the desk. Hermione's hands shook as she opened it. "You were right. I was afraid. Of the light, of you, of what you made me feel. But know this, you were the only thing that ever made me believe I could be more than my name. Don't look for me. The world needs you whole, not ruined by me. D." Hermione stood in the silent room for a long time, the words blurring as tears filled her eyes. She wanted to hate him for leaving, but she couldn't. He had always been running, from his past, from himself, and loving her had only shown him what he could never forgive. Still, as she traced the last line with her fingertips, she whispered, "You're wrong, Draco. You didn't ruin me. You made me remember that even darkness can love the light." And though the room was empty, she felt him there, in the air, in the faint scent of smoke and parchment, in the echo of a promise that had never truly been broken. He had taught her dark magic, yes, but somewhere along the way he had also taught her something far more dangerous: how to love without fear. Winter came early that year. Snow fell thick over the castle grounds, muffling the world in white silence. Hermione sat by the fire in her small flat near Hogsmeade, the letter he had left her lying open on the table. She had read it so many times the ink was beginning to smudge where her fingers had pressed against the parchment. Each word still stung, not for what it said, but for what it didn't. He had written of fear, of guilt, of love implied, but never confessed. 3 months had passed since he vanished. She had returned to the ministry, buried herself in research, smiled when spoken to, nodded through meetings. But every night, when the world went still, her thoughts returned to him, to his voice, his hands, the quiet ache he left behind. They had called off the investigation. Whoever had reported them had done so anonymously, and with no evidence left behind, the matter had been quietly shelved. Everyone assumed the project had failed. Only Hermione knew the truth, that what she had lost had nothing to do with magic at all. Still, she couldn't let it end there. One night, long after midnight, she opened the locked drawer of her desk. Inside was the book Draco had given her, one of the last remnants of their work together. A journal of spells and notes written in his neat, precise hand. She traced the cover with her fingertips. Beneath the lines of dark magic theory in faint ink, he had written a single phrase in Latin: "Amor vincit umbras." Love conquers shadows. "Liar," she whispered, though the word trembled. The snow outside the window drifted heavier, the world dissolving into white. And then, as if the thought summoned it, her fireplace flared. Green. Hermione's heart stopped. Out of the flames stepped a figure, tall and cloaked. His hair was longer now, his eyes sharp as ever, but the face, she would have known it anywhere. Draco. He looked older, thinner, as though the months had carved something new and painful into him. For a long moment, neither spoke. The air between them was thick with everything they hadn't said. Finally, Hermione found her voice. "You have some nerve." His mouth twitched. "I missed your insults." "Where have you been?" she demanded, standing. "You disappear, leave a note, and then just show up?" "I had to disappear," he said quietly. "The ministry wouldn't have stopped with an investigation. Someone wanted me gone." "And you couldn't trust me to help you?" "I couldn't drag you into it." "You already did." He flinched, and she hated herself for the way her voice shook. "You think leaving was noble," she said, softer now. "It wasn't. It was cruel." "I know." The simplicity of his answer disarmed her. She studied him, the exhaustion in his eyes, the faint tremor in his hands. "Why are you here, Draco?" He hesitated, as though the truth might undo him. "Because I couldn't stay away any longer." She didn't move, didn't trust herself to speak. He took a step closer. "I tried to live without you. I really did. I told myself it was safer, that you'd forget, that you'd hate me enough to let go. Did it work? He smiled faintly, something sad and self-mocking. Not even close. Hermione wanted to stay angry, to tell him he had no right, but her heart betrayed her. You could have written. I tried, he said. Every night, but every letter turned into an apology I didn't know how to end. Then say it now. He looked at her, really looked, and something inside him broke. I'm sorry, he whispered, for the fear, for the silence, for not being brave enough to stay. The apology hung between them like a fragile thread. Hermione's throat tightened. And what makes you think I'll forgive you? I don't, he said simply, but I had to see you, even if you don't. For a long time, the only sound was the crackle of the fire. Then Hermione said, You never told me the truth. Who reported us? Draco's eyes darkened. A former Death Eater, someone who wanted me to fail, to prove that I could never escape what I was. Then let's prove them wrong. He stared at her. You'd still work with me? After everything? I never stopped, she said. Every spell, every theory, I finished them. I couldn't let what we started die. He took another step forward. Why? Hermione's voice was steady now. Because what we were doing wasn't about darkness. It was about understanding it. You taught me that. He looked at her as though she'd handed him something sacred. You're still impossible. Only to people who give up too easily. He laughed softly, shaking his head. Merlin, I missed you. The sound of it, low and unguarded, undid her completely. Before she could think, she closed the distance between them, her hands finding the edge of his cloak. He didn't move at first, as though afraid she might vanish if he breathed. Then, slowly, he raised a hand to her face. You're shaking, he said. So are you. Neither spoke again. The kiss came naturally, inevitable, not fierce this time, but slow, tender, like a wound learning to heal. The taste of salt and warmth, of home rediscovered. When they broke apart, Hermione pressed her forehead to his. Don't leave again. I won't, he promised. Not unless you tell me to. I won't. He smiled then, a real smile. Small, crooked, beautiful. Good. They sat together before the fire, the tensions slowly unwinding between them. He told her fragments of where he had been, hiding near the coast, tracing the whispers of old magic to find who had betrayed them. The investigation had gone deeper than either of them knew. Someone at the ministry had wanted to use their research for power. You were right to stop, Hermione said softly. But you were wrong to think I'd stop loving you because of it. His head lifted sharply. You love me? She smiled, a little sadly. I think I always did. I was just too stubborn to admit it. He reached for her hand, entwining their fingers. If this is a dream, don't wake me. It's not, she said. It's just life, complicated and messy. Draco laughed softly. I never thought I'd have one with you in it. Hermione leaned against him, closing her eyes. For the first time in months, she felt peace, fragile, uncertain, but real. The snow outside kept falling, quiet and relentless. In the warmth of the firelight, two people who had once stood on opposite sides of everything found their way back to the same point. Not perfect, not easy, but enough. As the flames burned low, Draco whispered against her hair. I'll teach you something new tomorrow. Hermione smiled into his chest. Something dark? No, he said. Something worth saving. And for the first time since the war, they both believed it was possible. The days that followed his return felt unreal, like living inside a fragile spell that might break at any moment. Hermione still woke expecting the hollow ache of his absence, only to find him there, sitting by her window with a book in hand, a mug of tea steaming beside him. He was quieter now, softer in the small ways that spoke of a man learning to exist without a mask. He still flinched at sudden noises. He still looked away when she caught him watching her. But the walls he'd built were beginning to crumble, and for the first time, Hermione could see the man beneath them. Not the haughty boy she'd fought against, nor the haunted soul she'd pitied, but Draco. Simply Draco. One morning she found him standing outside her cottage, staring at the snow-covered fields that stretched toward the forest. The early sun painted his hair in silver light, his breath fogging in the cold air. "You're awake early," she said, wrapping her shawl tighter. He glanced at her with a faint smile. "I couldn't sleep. The silence here is strange. You'll get used to it." "I'm not sure I want to." Hermione stepped beside him. "What are you thinking about?" He hesitated, then said, "How it feels to have something to lose again." She looked at him sharply, but he wasn't looking at her. His gaze was fixed on the horizon, distant and uncertain. "You don't have to lose it," she said quietly. "You don't understand." His voice was low, brittle. "People like me, we're always waiting for the curse to come due." "Maybe it already has," she whispered, "and you survived it." Draco turned then, eyes searching hers. "And if the next one comes for you?" "I'll survive that too." Something in her tones silenced him. He looked away, but not before she saw the flicker of emotion in his eyes. Fear, love, the ache of wanting what he didn't think he deserved. They stood there for a long time, side by side in the snow, until the chill drove them back inside. In the weeks that followed, life settled into a fragile rhythm. Draco rarely left the cottage, though he began helping her again with her research. His insight into magic, especially the parts most wizards refused to touch, was invaluable. Together, they rewrote their notes, stripping away the darker elements, searching for what he called the neutral heart of the spell. "You can't destroy darkness," he said one night as they worked by the fire. "But you can understand it, and maybe that's enough." Hermione smiled faintly. "You sound like me." He smirked. "Don't tell anyone. I have a reputation to maintain." It was such an ordinary moment, teasing, familiar, warm, that Hermione almost forgot the weight of everything behind them. But when their eyes met, the air shifted again, quiet and charged. "Draco," she began, then stopped. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" He leaned back, studying her. "Next?" "Yes, this." She gestured around them, the books, the firelight, the quiet life they'd built in hiding. "It feels temporary, like you're waiting for something." He didn't answer right away. Then finally he said, "Maybe I am. Maybe I'm waiting for the world to forget who I was." Hermione reached across the table, her hand covering his. "The world doesn't get to decide who you are anymore." He looked down at their hands, at the contrast between her small, ink-stained fingers and his long, pale ones. "You always say things like that, as if they're simple truths." "They are," she said softly. "You just don't want to believe them." He smiled faintly. "You really are impossible. So, you keep telling me." But later that night, as she drifted to sleep beside him for the first time, she felt him watching her. His hand brushed her hair back from her face, and she heard him whisper, too quietly for her to answer, "You make me want to believe." Winter deepened. The days grew shorter, the nights longer, and the snow piled high against the windows. Sometimes Hermione caught Draco standing at the door, his gaze distant, as if listening for something far away. One evening, she found him outside again, wand in hand, drawing sigils in the air that glowed faintly before fading. "What are you doing?" she asked. He turned, startled. "Warding the perimeter. Old habits die hard." "Are you expecting trouble?" He hesitated. "There's always trouble, Hermione, especially for people like us." She stepped closer. "You mean people who love each other?" His jaw tightened. "People who tempt fate." Her heart sank. "You're planning something." He didn't deny it. "I've been hearing rumors, whispers about the department reopening the investigation. They're not convinced the case was closed properly. If they trace the magic again—" "They won't," she interrupted. "I covered our tracks." Draco shook his head. "Not enough. They're not looking for spells. They're looking for me." "Then we'll face it together," she said firmly. He turned away. "You don't understand. They'll never see me as anything but what I was." "Then let them be wrong." "Hermione!" "No," she said sharply, stepping in front of him. "I won't let you run again. I can't." His expression twisted, torn between anger and despair. "You think this is about me? It's about you. You're everything they'll use to get to me. Your name, your past, it's all ammunition." She stared at him, her throat tight. "So what? I've faced worse threats than gossip and suspicion." "This isn't gossip," he snapped. "They'll ruin you." "Then let them try," she said again, her voice trembling but fierce. "I don't care about them, Draco. I care about you." For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the wind outside, howling against the walls. Finally, Draco whispered, "You'll hate me for this. Try me." He exhaled, his breath visible in the cold air. "If I can keep you safe by leaving, I'll do it." "Then you'll prove everything I've ever said about you wrong," she said, tears stinging her eyes. "That you can't change, that you'll always choose guilt over love." He flinched. "Don't," she said, voice breaking. "Don't make me lose you again." Draco looked at her then, really looked. The fear, the love, the impossible pull between them, and something inside him gave way. He stepped forward, cupped her face in his cold hands, and kissed her with the kind of desperation that felt like a goodbye and a promise all at once. When he pulled away, his voice was barely a breath. "Then I won't." Hermione stared at him, not daring to hope. "You'll stay?" He nodded. "For as long as you'll have me." She smiled through her tears. "Then I suppose that means forever." Draco gave a small, disbelieving laugh, his forehead pressing against hers. "Careful, Granger. You're starting to sound like a romantic." "Maybe you taught me," she whispered. Outside, the snow continued to fall, silent, endless, soft. And for the first time in a long, long while, Draco Malfoy let himself believe that perhaps, just perhaps, the darkness could be defeated, not by power or redemption, but by the stubborn, impossible light of love. The snow began to melt, slowly, reluctantly, as though winter itself didn't want to loosen its hold on the world. In the cottage at the edge of the forest, Hermione felt the first hint of warmth return to the air. The hearth burned less fiercely now, and yet the house seemed more alive than ever. There was laughter in the evenings, books piled by the armchair, the faint scent of tea and parchment lingering in the rooms. Draco had started to smile again. Real smiles, unguarded, though they still surprised him. Sometimes Hermione would catch him humming under his breath while brewing coffee or reading aloud from one of the dusty old grimoires they'd salvaged from their work. It was ordinary. It was peaceful. It was everything neither of them had dared to dream of. And yet, even as life settled into this fragile calm, there was a tension beneath it. The world outside had not forgotten them. One morning, Hermione woke to find Draco gone from their bed. The fire was out, the air cold. She found him outside, standing barefoot in the frost, wand drawn, eyes scanning the tree line. "Draco!" He turned sharply, lowering his wand when he saw her. "Go back inside." She frowned. "What's wrong?" "Nothing." "That's not nothing." He hesitated, then said, "I thought I saw something. Movement near the forest." Hermione glanced toward the dark line of trees, the morning mist curling between them. Could have been a deer. Or it could have been someone watching. She shivered, though not from the cold. "The ministry?" "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe my ghosts just like to play tricks on me." She reached for his hand, tugging gently. "Come inside. Whatever it is, we'll face it together." He followed her reluctantly, the stiffness in his movements betraying how uneasy he was. For several days, nothing happened. Hermione told herself it was his imagination, a lingering habit of paranoia that time would heal. But then letters began arriving. Unmarked envelopes slipped beneath the door. Inside each one, a single phrase written in elegant, looping script. "We know." The first time, Draco burned the note without a word. The second, he didn't speak for an hour. The third, he started packing. "You can't keep running," Hermione said, blocking his way. "I'm not running," he snapped, stuffing books into a bag. "I'm protecting you." "By leaving me again?" His jaw tightened. "If they come for me, you can claim ignorance. Say I manipulated you." "Do you really think I'd let them believe that?" He stopped, meeting her gaze. "Hermione, they'll destroy you. Your career, your name, everything." "I don't care about my name." He gave a humorless laugh. "You always cared. It's what made you stronger than the rest of us. You believed the world could change if you just fought hard enough." "Maybe I still do," she said. "And I'm not giving up on you now." Draco turned away, his voice low. "You should. I was born to ruin things." Hermione moved closer, anger and love burning together in her chest. "You didn't ruin me. You made me stronger." "Then why does it feel like I'm dragging you into the dark?" "Because you don't see that I'm already here," she said. "And I chose it. I chose you." He looked at her then, and something broke in his face. A quiet, terrible tenderness that made her heart ache. He dropped the bag. "You make it very hard to leave, Granger." "Good," she whispered, "because you're not going anywhere." The next few days passed in uneasy calm. They kept the curtains drawn and their voices low. Draco reinforced the wards, and Hermione strengthened the protective charms around the property. Still, she could feel the tension rising in him. He moved through the house like a man waiting for a storm. One night, she found him sitting alone by the fire, staring into the flames. The light carved shadows along his face, making him look older, wearier. "You can't sleep again?" she asked softly. He didn't look up. "When I close my eyes, I see them. The auras, the mark, my mother crying. Your face when I left." Hermione knelt beside him, resting a hand on his knee. "You're here now. For how long?" "For as long as we fight for it." gave a small, bitter laugh. You make it sound like love can undo everything. She met his gaze. Maybe it can't undo it, but it can change what comes next. He stared at her for a long moment before whispering, "You really believe that, don't you?" "I do." He leaned forward, brushing his lips against her forehead. "Then I'll try to believe it too." But belief wasn't enough to keep the past away. It was a week later when the knock came. 3 sharp raps at the door. Draco stiffened instantly, his wand in hand before Hermione could speak. "Stay back," he said, his voice low. She ignored him and opened the door. 2 auras stood there, cloaked in grey, the golden insignia of the ministry gleaming on their collars. "Miss Granger," the taller one said politely, "we're looking for Draco Malfoy." Hermione's pulse quickened. "He's not here." The aura's gaze flicked past her shoulder, scanning the dimly lit room. "We've received reports of unauthorized magical activity traced to this location. May we come in?" Before she could answer, Draco stepped forward. "It's fine, Hermione." Her head whipped around. "No, it's all right," he said, his voice steady. "They won't hurt you." The auras exchanged glances. One of them pulled a parchment from his robe. "Draco Malfoy, you are hereby summoned to answer charges related to the misuse of classified magical research." Draco took the paper calmly. "Of course I am." Hermione's heart pounded. "You can't go with them." He turned to her, his eyes soft. "It's the only way. Running won't fix this." "They'll destroy you," she whispered. "Maybe," he said, "but I won't let them destroy you too." She shook her head fiercely, tears gathering in her eyes. "You can't protect me by walking into their hands." Draco reached out, his fingers brushing her cheek. "I told you once I'd teach you something worth saving. This is it, knowing when to stop fighting fate." "I don't believe in fate," she said, her voice breaking. "I know." His smile was small, sad, beautiful. "That's why I love you." The auras cleared their throats, but neither of them moved. Hermione gripped his hand, refusing to let go. "Promise me you'll come back." He hesitated. "If I can." "That's not good enough." He leaned forward, pressing his lips to hers, a kiss that felt like a vow carved out of desperation and hope. When he pulled back, he whispered, "Then I promise." And before she could say anything else, he stepped past her into the snow. The auras followed, their figures fading into the white haze until only silence remained. Hermione stood in the doorway long after they disappeared, her heart a hollow drum in her chest. The fire crackled behind her, warm and useless. She didn't cry, not yet. Instead, she whispered to the empty air, to the echo he'd left behind, "I'll find you, Draco. I always do." And somewhere beyond the horizon, in the cold and the dark, she hoped he heard her. Spring came late that year. The snow melted in hesitant patches, leaving the earth soaked and raw. In the small cottage that had once been filled with laughter and low-voiced lessons, silence lingered like a ghost. Hermione moved through the rooms, as though afraid of breaking something fragile. His coat still hung by the door, his cup still sat on the table, and the faintest trace of his scent, smoke and cedar, still clung to the air. It had been a month since the auras took him. The ministry refused to tell her anything. Each inquiry was met with polite dismissal. An ongoing investigation, restricted access, sensitive materials. But Hermione Granger had never been one to accept silence as an answer. She worked late into the nights, scouring every record she could reach, sending letters to every contact who might still owe her a favor. Most never replied. The few who did told her to stop asking. But Hermione couldn't stop. Not when she woke each night from dreams where she saw him behind iron bars, his hands bound, his eyes still searching for her in the dark. One morning, when the post arrived, she found a sealed envelope bearing no crest, no handwriting she recognized. Inside was a single slip of parchment, Ministry Holding Facility, Sub-Level 9. No trial, no name. That was all. No signature, no explanation. But it was enough. Hermione didn't hesitate. The ministry at night was eerily quiet, the corridors echoing with the soft hum of the building's wards. Cloaked in an invisibility charm, Hermione moved like a shadow through the lower levels, her heart pounding in her throat. She had done this before, years ago, when the world had been different, when she still believed justice meant something. Now she wasn't sure what she believed in anymore, except him. She reached Sub-Level 9 without incident. The corridor was long and cold, lined with thick iron doors. The air smelled faintly of damp stone and lingering spells. She counted the cells, her wand light trembling slightly, and then she saw him. He sat against the far wall, pale and still, his wrists bound in anti-magic cuffs. His hair was longer, his face thinner, but when he lifted his head and their eyes met, the world stopped. "Hermione," he whispered, disbelief breaking through the exhaustion in his voice. She pressed her palm to the enchanted glass barrier. "Draco." He stood, moving closer until only the faint shimmer of the containment charm separated them. "What are you doing here?" "What do you think?" she said. "I'm getting you out." He shook his head. "No, you shouldn't have come. If they find you, I don't care." His eyes flashed with fear and something like awe. "You'll lose everything." "I already did when they took you." For a long moment, neither spoke. The barrier glowed faintly between them, humming like a heartbeat. Draco closed his eyes, exhaling shakily. "They're not going to let me go. They've decided what I am. Then we'll prove them wrong." He gave a faint, broken laugh. "You sound just like you used to." "Good," she said fiercely, "because you're still the man I fell in love with." His expression faltered, a flicker of emotion passing over it. Pain, longing, disbelief. "Don't say that." "Why not?" "Because it'll make this harder." Hermione stepped closer, her voice trembling. "I don't care about harder. I care about you." He looked at her for a long, silent moment, the kind of look that held everything they'd never said aloud. Then he whispered, "I dreamed about this, about you finding me." She managed a faint, trembling smile. "Then let's make it real." It took hours. Ancient wards, layered enchantments, protective sigils that had been designed by the very people who taught her magic. Every spell she cast felt like a rebellion against everything she had once sworn to uphold. Finally, the last barrier shimmered and cracked. The air pulsed, the magic unraveling. Draco stumbled forward as the cuffs fell away, his first breath of freedom catching in his throat. Hermione caught him before he fell. His body was cold, trembling with fatigue. She could feel how thin he'd become, how long it had been since he'd last seen light. "You shouldn't have done this," he murmured against her shoulder. She pulled back, eyes bright with fierce determination. "You're worth it." He looked at her as though the words were foreign. Then, quietly, "You'll never stop surprising me." Let's go before they find us. But as they turned toward the exit, a voice echoed down the corridor. Hermione Granger. She froze. An aura stood at the far end of the hall, wand drawn. Draco stepped instinctively in front of her, though his legs barely held him. Move aside, the aura ordered. You're interfering with a ministry operation. No, Hermione said firmly. I'm ending one. The aura hesitated. He's dangerous. Hermione's hand tightened on Draco's arm. No, he's human. Something in her voice, calm, unflinching, full of quiet fury, made the aura hesitate. Hermione lifted her wand, murmured something under her breath, and the lights flickered. A moment later, they were gone. They didn't stop running until they reached the cliffs beyond the forest. The sea crashed below, wild and grey beneath the moonlight. Draco collapsed onto the grass, breathing hard. Hermione knelt beside him, pressing a trembling hand to his cheek. You're safe, she whispered. You're safe now. He looked up at her, disbelief still shadowing his face. You're insane. I've been called worse. He laughed then, a real laugh, ragged and full of relief. You broke into the ministry for me. Wouldn't be the first time I've broken the rules for something that mattered. He reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together. Hermione. Yes. I don't know how to live in a world where someone would do that for me. She smiled softly, brushing the hair from his face. Then start by living anyway. The wind swept around them, cold and alive. They sat there in silence for a long time, listening to the ocean, to their breathing, to the slow, fragile rhythm of freedom. Finally, Draco said quietly, They'll come for us again. Let them, she said. We'll be ready. He turned to her, the moonlight catching the faint smile on his lips. You still think love conquers shadows? I know it does. He studied her for a long moment, and then, as if surrendering to something larger than fear, he whispered, Then teach me. Hermione leaned forward, their foreheads touching, her breath mingling with his. I already have. The waves crashed below them, the night cold and vast, but in that small circle of warmth, her hands, his heartbeat, the unbroken thread that bound them. The darkness finally felt like something they could face together. And when dawn broke over the cliffs, painting the world in pale gold, it found them still there. Two souls who had walked through war and loss and shadow, holding on to the one thing that had never failed them. Not magic, not redemption, just love.
To be happy, you do not need to have a dark magic. Sometimes a tasty sip of a coffee is enough. Sometimes it is just warm and candle hugs. Sometimes it's the purring of a cat. I want to wish you only happiness in the new year. Truly, it is everywhere. It is in every little corner, and I wish you to see it and to feel it.